They all thought he would die. Jackson stood at the edge of the alien jungle, staring at the thick fog and tall black trees. The ground under his boots was damp, and the air smelled like old blood and rotten fruit. Above him, the alien suns were covered by clouds, making the whole planet feel like a haunted dream. Behind him, the alien council stood watching, some hiding grins, others already turning away. They had sent him here to die, not as a warrior, not even as a prisoner, but as a joke, a peace gesture, they said, something symbolic. "We offer the human as a sacrifice to the planet Gracker," said High Chancellor Shurik with fake honor in his voice. The alien crowd clapped politely. But everyone knew what this place was. No one survived Gracker. It was the home of the beast known as Kurox, a giant, deadly predator that killed anything that moved. Armies had tried to study it, catch it, or kill it, but they all failed, so instead, the alien sent Jackson, a human, with no weapons except a blade and a basic translator. They wanted to prove humans were weak, foolish, and unfit to walk among the stars. Jackson knew it too, but he smiled, adjusted the strap on his small pack, and said, "Let's find out what makes your monster so scary." With that, he stepped into the jungle, alone. The vines closed behind him like a mouth swallowing him whole. Inside, everything changed. Light turned green, then blue, then red, as strange plants pulsed around him. Every step he took echoed like thunder in the silent forest. Insects buzzed in the air, but none dared land on him. He moved slowly, marking trees with scratches, listening for danger, breathing deep. He knew the rules. On Earth, he studied animal behavior, worked with wild wolves, bears, and big cats. He knew the first lesson: never act like prey. Hours passed, then night came fast. Jackson found a small hollow under a tree and lit a tiny fire using rocks and old training. The fire was weak, but it kept the shadows away. He chewed on dried meat from his pack and waited, his blade always in hand, and then he felt it, not saw, not heard, but felt a presence, heavy and large, watching him, circling him like a ghost. His fire flickered, and his breath grew cold. Two glowing eyes appeared just outside the light, low to the ground but wide like lanterns. It was Kurox. The beast stepped forward, slow and calm, like it wasn't afraid of anything. Its body was covered in thick dark fur, muscles rippling beneath the skin. Claws like knives, but it didn't charge, didn't growl, it just stared at him, tilting its head slightly, curious. Jackson didn't move, didn't speak. He gently took a piece of meat and tossed it near the beast's feet. Kurox looked at it, sniffed once, then stepped back into the shadows without a sound. Jackson exhaled slowly, his heart racing, his mind spinning. Back at the alien base, they laughed and drank, placing bets on how many bones would be left of the human. "Maybe just teeth," joked one warrior. "No, the beast eats teeth too," replied another. And they laughed harder. No one expected Jackson to survive the night. But Jackson wasn't like other prey. The next morning, he woke with the fire cold, but his body untouched. On the ground near the ashes was the meat he offered gone, eaten, and beside it, a single large claw mark, a message, maybe a warning, or maybe a sign. Jackson packed his things, stood tall, and whispered into the forest, "I'm still here." He didn't know what would happen next, but something inside him had changed. He wasn't afraid anymore. He came to Gracker to survive. Now he wanted something more. He wanted to understand the beast and maybe, just maybe, make it understand him. And somewhere, deep in the jungle, the beast was watching again, not as a hunter watches prey, but as one leader watches another. The mission no one was expected to survive had just begun. Jackson moved deeper into the jungle, each step softer than the last. He knew now that the beast, Kurox, was not chasing him, not hunting him. Yet it was always there, always near. Sometimes he would see the trees move behind him, slow and heavy. Sometimes he would hear the deep thump of paws on the soft ground. But the beast never showed its full body in the light again. Jackson didn't try to force it, he just let it be. The forest began to change. The trees grew taller, their trunks covered in red moss that pulsed like it was breathing. He crossed over bones, many bones, some half buried, some cracked open, some still stained with dried blood. This was it, Curox's territory. No other creature dared live here. Not even the flying reptiles or the snake bugs. Jackson walked carefully, showing no fear, and never raising his blade unless he heard something close. He found a cave, hidden behind heavy vines, large enough for a beast to live in. The smell inside was thick with fur and meat, but it was empty. He knew where he was now. The beast's den. Instead of turning away, Jackson stepped inside and sat down. He placed his pack beside him and pulled out more dried meat, tearing it in half and placing it gently on a stone near the entrance. Then he waited. The cave was quiet except for the distant hum of strange insects. Jackson's eyes grew heavy, but he kept his hand near his blade and one foot touching the ground, ready to move. He didn't sleep, not really, but he rested in the silence, and then the silence broke. A shadow passed over the cave entrance, large and silent. Curox had returned. The beast sniffed the air, stepped inside, and stared at him again. It looked at the food, then at Jackson, and then, without a sound, sat. Jackson's heart beat fast. Not in fear but in awe, the beast accepted the offering. Not with greed, but with understanding. For a long time they just sat there, staring at each other. Then Curox did something no one expected. It lowered its head, just slightly, as if showing a small sign of respect. Jackson didn't speak, didn't move. He just nodded once. Slowly, the next day, Jackson followed the beast, not too close, but enough to keep it in sight. Curox didn't stop him, didn't warn him off. It walked through its territory like a king, and Jackson followed like a silent guest. They crossed a river with glowing green fish, past trees that hissed when touched, and climbed a small cliff with wide views of the valley below. And all the way, Jackson watched, learned, and listened. He noticed how Curox sniffed the air before drinking, how it stopped before entering certain areas, how it crushed dangerous plants under its paws without a second thought. Jackson started to understand the jungle, not with weapons, but with instinct. That night, the beast didn't sleep in the cave. It slept outside, near the entrance, its body blocking the only way in, not as a threat, but as a guardian. Jackson finally allowed himself to sleep deeply. In the morning, he found something new near his fire, a fresh kill laid beside his pack, a gift from Curox, a piece of raw alien meat. Still warm, torn from something large and dangerous. Jackson smiled and whispered, "Thank you," even though he wasn't sure the beast would understand. Back at the alien council base, a messenger returned with no news, no human signal, no sounds, no movements. The scout reported, "Then he's dead," one council member said. Sipping a golden drink, "He was a fool anyway," another replied. Trying to walk where kings fell, but far away, in the heart of the jungle. The so-called fool was now being watched by a god. And that god was starting to walk beside him, not because of power, not because of fear, but because for the first time, the beast saw something different, something not weak, not loud, not cruel. Just a quiet man who did not run, who did not scream, who gave without asking. The jungle had seen soldiers, hunters, monsters, machines, but it had never seen a human like Jackson. And Curox was no longer just a hunter. He was a shadow, a protector, and soon maybe something even more. The beast's territory had a new name now, the place where the human walks and the forest listened. Jackson woke slowly, his body sore but his mind sharp. The jungle outside was quiet, too quiet. He sat up and looked toward the cave entrance, expecting to see the thick vines gently swaying, maybe a few flying insects, maybe a snake or two, but instead he saw Curox lying near the fire pit, its head resting between massive paws, its golden eyes half closed. It had spent the whole night there, like a giant dog guarding a sleeping child. Jackson didn't move too fast, didn't make a sound. He knew any sudden motion might end their trust. He picked up a piece of meat and placed it softly on a flat stone. Then backed away, sitting down again with slow breath. Kirax opened one eye, looked at the meat, then at Jackson, and without a growl began to eat. But this time, it didn't turn its back or walk away. It stayed, watching Jackson with quiet curiosity. Then something new happened. Jackson stretched out his hand, palm up, showing he held no weapon, no trick, no fear. Kirax's ears twitched, its body tensed for a second. But then, slowly, it moved forward, its giant nose touched his fingers for the first time, rough, wet, warm. The breath that hit his hand was hot and wild, like wind coming from a furnace. Jackson didn't move, didn't flinch. He whispered, "Good boy," even though he wasn't sure what Kirax was. But the beast tilted its head, not with confusion, but with interest. It understood something, not the words, but the tone, the energy, the intent. For the first time, Jackson felt it clearly. This beast wasn't just an animal, it was intelligent. Suddenly, a roar echoed from far in the trees, deep and long, shaking the ground under them. Another predator, and it was coming closer. Kirax jumped to its feet, teeth bared, eyes burning. Like fire, it looked at Jackson, then at the forest, then back at Jackson again, and then it moved. Not toward the sound, but toward Jackson. It stood between him and the jungle, like a wall of fur and muscle. Another roar closer this time, and then crashing branches, heavy footsteps. From the trees came a massive four-eyed reptilian creature. Skin like stone, mouth filled with black teeth. It charged, but Kirax didn't hesitate. The beast launched forward with terrifying speed, slamming into the reptile mid-air, claws ripping, fangs biting. Jackson stood frozen at the cave entrance, heart pounding, blade in hand, but useless against something so large. The battle was brutal, short and violent. Kirax overpowered the other beast, sending it fleeing into the woods. Howling in pain and fear, Kirax didn't chase it, didn't kill for fun. He simply returned, blood dripping from one leg, breathing hard, but standing proud. Jackson stepped forward without thinking. He tore fabric from his shirt, dipped it in clean water from his canteen, and began cleaning the cut on Kirax's leg. The beast didn't pull away, didn't growl, it just watched him. When Jackson finished, he looked up, and what he saw stunned him. Kirax lowered his head and gently pressed it against Jackson's chest, just for a moment. A gesture that needed no words, no language. Respect. Back at the Alien Council station, scouts argued over the data. There's movement, but it's not just the beast, one said. Impossible. Another replied. The human is dead, he must be. No, said the scout. There are two heat signatures walking together. The council members grew silent, nervous. If Jackson was alive, if he had bonded with Kirax, it would mean something far worse than failure. It would mean humans were something more. Back in the jungle, Jackson and Kirax walked side by side, not master and pet, not hunter and prey, but equals. Jackson looked around and realized the jungle didn't scare him anymore. He knew which trees whispered lies, which rocks hid danger, and which plants burned on touch. And wherever he went, Kirax was close. Jackson began to speak more, not to command but to connect. He told the beast about Earth, about forests, rivers, the animals he worked with, the wolves he once raised. Kirax didn't answer, of course, but sometimes it would grunt softly or nudge his shoulder like it understood. Jackson began to believe something wild, something impossible. Maybe this wasn't just survival. Maybe this was friendship, the first between man and monster. And as the sun set again over the jungle, Jackson whispered into the warm air, I'm not here to survive anymore. He said, I'm here to change everything. Rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the jungle into a living storm. Jackson stood at the edge of a cliff, soaked and shivering, staring down at a broken path below. Kirax was beside him, tail low, fur dripping wet, eyes scanning the trees. Something wasn't right. The jungle had gone silent, too silent. Even the buzzing insects and whispering leaves had stopped. Then it came a sudden crack, a roar, and the sky split open as three long, thin creatures dropped from the canopy like lightning. They were razorlings, pack hunters with needle teeth and claws like metal hooks. Jackson raised his blade, but it felt like holding a twig against a thunderstorm. Curox roared first, louder than the sky, and lunged at the nearest attacker. But there were too many, too fast and too hungry. One razorlings leapt onto Jackson's back, cutting into his shoulder. He fell, rolled, kicked, but the beast was strong. Then out of nowhere, Curox slammed into it, biting its neck in a spray of green blood. Jackson gasped for air as Curox circled him, growling like a wildfire, claws tearing into the jungle floor. But the fight wasn't over. One of the razorlings leapt from a tree above, its mouth wide open, heading straight for Jackson's chest. Curox saw it, but the angle was wrong. He couldn't reach in time. Jackson raised his blade, too slow but at the last second. Curox did the unthinkable. He threw himself in front of Jackson, taking the hit. The razorling's claws cut deep into Curox's side, before the beast crushed it with his jaws. When it was over, the ground was covered in blood and broken plants. Two of the attackers were dead. The last one fled with a howl. Jackson crawled to Curox, who was now lying on his side, chest rising fast, blood soaking his fur. "No, no, no," Jackson whispered, dropping his pack and pressing his hands on the wound. He tore off his jacket, tied it around the deepest cut, tried to stop the bleeding. Curox didn't growl, didn't bite, didn't resist. He just trusted. Jackson worked for hours, washing the wound, stitching it with thread from his kit, lighting a small fire to keep them warm. That night he didn't sleep. He sat beside the wounded beast, whispering stories, singing old earth songs under his breath, wiping sweat from Curox's forehead as the fire cracked. The beast opened one eye and made a low sound, not pain, not anger. It was a sound Jackson had heard once before, from a wolf pup after it was rescued from a trap. A sound of gratitude in the alien council base. A scout arrived breathless, muddy, and pale. He had found the razorling pack's corpses and giant claw marks nearby. "There was a fight," he said, "and the human won." Gasps filled the room. "No," said one council elder, "the beast must have killed the others. But why would it protect the human?" Asked another, "That creature has no loyalty." No one had an answer, but deep in the jungle, that loyalty was becoming truth. The next morning, Jackson woke to find Curox still breathing, still weak, but alive. He fed the beast bits of meat by hand, talked softly, and watched as Curox's tail moved ever so slightly. And then on the third day Curox stood, slowly, painfully, but with pride. Jackson stood too, eyes wide, heart full. "You didn't leave me," he whispered, "and I'll never leave you." Curox stepped forward and touched his nose to Jackson's shoulder right, where the scar from the fight still burned. That moment meant more than words, more than contracts or flags. That moment meant family. They walked again that evening, slow and steady. Jackson helped Curox limp across rocks and roots. And Curox kept his head high, even when it hurt. They were no longer just surviving. They were choosing each other, choosing to fight, bleed, and rise together. And the jungle watched and whispered something new in the wind. The human had passed the test, but so had the beast. Not by fighting, but by protecting. Not by surviving, but by trusting. From that day, no predator dared step near them, because every creature could smell it now. The beast no longer walked alone, and neither did the man. Thunder rolled over the alien skies, heavy and cold, at the council base. The banners of mourning were already raised. A human soldier had been sent into the death jungle of Gracker, and 3 weeks had passed too long, even for fools. The alien leaders sat in their grand chairs, sipping bitter root wine and smiling at their cleverness. High Chancellor Shurik leaned forward and laughed. "Let it be known, the human made it 2 days longer than expected." The hall chuckled. Diplomats nodded, and bets were quietly collected. Outside, warriors sharpened their weapons, preparing for a grand tale of the beast's victory over man. No. One noticed the vibration in the ground at first. Then the guards at the outer gate stood straighter, eyes wide. Something was coming. No, two somethings. Heavy footsteps echoed across the stone path, slow and steady, but full of purpose. And then he appeared, out of the morning mist, covered in dried blood and jungle dust. Walked Jackson, alive, breathing, calm, his eyes sharp, his posture straight. But what followed behind him made even the strongest alien warriors step back in. Fear Curox, the apex beast, the jungle god. The death that walks now walking beside a human like a tamed shadow. Its eyes scanned the crowd, unafraid, teeth sharp, claws ready, but its body calm. It wore vines across its back like armor. And around its neck hung a broken collar, the same collar used by hunters to try to trap it years ago. Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. Weapons were drawn, but no one dared raise them fully. Jackson stopped at the base of the council. Steps, looked up at the leaders who had thrown him away, and said one simple word. Hello. No one answered, not at first. One diplomat dropped his cup, another stumbled backward, and a guard accidentally fired his weapon into the sky. Curox growled once, low and deep, and the silence returned like a hammer. High Chancellor Shurik stood slowly, trying to smile. We feared you were dead, he said, voice shaking. Jackson gave a small nod. So did I, he replied. But the jungle had other plans. He reached out and placed his hand on Curox's head. The beast lowered it, pressing gently against his palm like a giant loyal dog. Impossible, whispered one of the generals. That creature has killed armies. Not all creatures respond to force. Jackson said, some respond to kindness. Another voice asked, did you tame it? No, Jackson said firmly. We chose each other. The words hit harder than any weapon. The jungle hadn't broken the human. It had rebuilt him. The monster hadn't eaten him. It had followed him. And now they were partners behind Jackson. The wind carried leaves and soft whispers from the jungle. Some said other beasts were watching from the trees. Unseen, guards and warriors stepped back as Jackson slowly walked through the courtyard, with Curox at his side. No chains, no muzzle, no fear. Just power wrapped in calm. Children peeked from windows, elders held their breath, and soldiers lowered their weapons in quiet respect. The beast did not roar. It didn't need to. Its silence was louder than thunder. Inside the council chambers, panic grew in secret. If the human could do this, what else could he do? If one man could walk into death and come back with death as a friend, what were humans really capable of? Jackson stopped in front of the grand table, stared at the maps of control, of borders, of colonies, and said, You sent me to die, Shurik. Tried to laugh. We hoped to test you. You tested yourselves, Jackson replied. And you were found lacking. He turned to leave, but then paused, looked over his shoulder, and added, Next time you want to throw someone away, make sure they can't walk back with your nightmares on a leash. He walked out, and Curox followed, tail sweeping across the polished floor. The doors closed behind them, echoing through the chamber like a warning bell. Outside, the crowd didn't cheer, didn't cry, they just watched. Because they knew something had changed. A man had gone into the dark to die. But what came out was something else. A symbol, a story, a message. Never underestimate a human who refuses to surrender, especially one who walks beside a monster. Asterisk, the galaxy couldn't stop talking about the man who walked beside death. Footage from the alien council base had leaked, captured by a trembling scout's drone. It showed Jackson walking calmly across the courtyard, his hand on the head of the beast, Curox silent, huge, alive, walking not behind him, not ahead of him, but with him, within hours. It was on every screen across a dozen star systems. Some laughed, calling it a trick, a puppet, a stunt. Others stared in silence, chills running down their spines. One general from the Krell Empire whispered, If that man can tame Gracker's death god, what else can humans do? But for Jackson, none of that mattered. He wasn't chasing fame, he was just going home. He boarded the transport ship sent to retrieve him, and to everyone's shock, Kurox followed him onto the vessel. The crew panicked at first, ready to lock themselves in the escape pods. But the beast did nothing, not even a growl. It sat near Jackson, curled its tail, and watched the stars outside like it had always belonged among them, on Earth. When the news reached the human leaders, there was a long silence in the war room. Then, a general stood up and simply said, "Bring him in." They didn't ask questions, didn't doubt the report. They knew what this meant. Something had changed. When Jackson arrived on Earth, people gathered by the thousands, some with signs that read "Welcome home," others holding their children close. Unsure if Kurox was truly safe, Jackson stepped out first, wearing a simple jacket and a quiet smile. Then came the beast, fur-brushed, claws clean, eyes calm. Children gasped, adults froze. And then slowly people began to cheer. One small girl reached out her hand, and Jackson nodded gently. Kurox lowered his massive head, sniffed the child's fingers, and gave a soft grunt. The crowd erupted, not in fear but in wonder. News called him the Beast Walker, the Death Tamer, and even the Jungle King. But Jackson didn't care about titles. He wanted something else to learn. He began to study Kurox more closely. Alongside human scientists and animal experts, the beast showed signs of understanding speech patterns, emotional responses, and even memory. It learned to follow voice cues, recognize symbols, and strangely show affection. But most of all, it only ever truly listened to Jackson. It was not a pet, not a soldier, it was a partner. Other governments began to send messages, asking for advice, requesting visits, offering deals. One alien ambassador arrived with gifts and said, "What you've done rewrites our understanding of nature." Jackson replied, "Nature didn't change, we just finally listened." Soon, a project was born, called the Unity Program. Humans and alien species working together to study high-risk creatures across planets, not to kill them, but to understand them, and at the head of it stood Jackson, with Kurox always just behind during one operation. An elite alien warrior mocked Jackson, sneering, "Your monster follows you like a puppy." Jackson didn't react, but Kurox took one step forward, growled once, and the warrior turned pale and ran. Everyone laughed, but Jackson just sighed. "He's not a weapon," he said. "He's my friend. But even friendship brings challenges." One night, Kurox began to whine, ears twitching, restless. Jackson followed his gaze to the stars and realized the jungle was calling. Not for war, not for blood, but for balance. So Jackson made a choice. He returned to Gracker, not alone, but with a small team of brave volunteers and new technology. They built a small outpost near the old den, not to conquer, but to coexist. Kurox roared into the trees once more, and something amazing happened. Other beasts appeared, curious, watching, waiting. They didn't attack, didn't flee, they sensed. It too, something had shifted. The man was no longer just a visitor, he was now part of the jungle, and Kurox? He was no longer the god of death, he was the guardian of the balance. Together, they had become a story that traveled not by ships, but by fear, hope, and awe. The galaxy didn't know what scared it more, the beast that walked beside the man, or the man who walked beside the beast. Stars blinked above Gracker, as if the sky itself was watching. Below, the jungle glowed with soft lights, not from machines, but from life. Bioluminescent trees, peaceful roars in the distance. The jungle no longer feared Jackson, it had accepted him. At the heart of the valley stood a new structure, half stone, half root, all grown with care. This was the Unity Outpost, a place not ruled by a flag, but by trust. Inside, humans worked beside aliens, healing wounded animals, studying ancient markings, and listening, not commanding. And at the center of it all was Jackson, wearing old boots, a scratched piece, and a quiet expression. He wasn't a ruler, wasn't a warlord. But when he spoke, the galaxy listened, and beside him, always near, always calm, stood Kirax, no longer the monster of nightmares, but the first of something greater. He still roared, still hunted when needed, still guarded the jungle with fire in his chest, but now he chose who to protect, one by one. Stories from Gracker began to ripple across systems. A poisonous dragon beast spared a wounded human child. After sniffing her and walking away, a pack of once feral shadowhounds began following Unity scouts, not attacking, just observing, learning, waiting. Something was changing, not just in Gracker, but everywhere. Other death worlds were explored not with bombs, but with bravery. Jackson trained new teams, humans and aliens together. Bonded not by orders, but by survival. He called it the symbiosis cores. No fear, he taught them. Only respect. Meanwhile, the old alien council that had once thrown him away struggled to stay in power. Their people began asking questions. Why did we try to kill the man who brought peace? Why do humans walk among monsters and come back alive? Why do the beasts bow to them, but not to us? Whispers turned to riots, and fear turned to shame. When warlords threatened the outer colonies, Jackson sent no fleet, no army. Instead, he arrived in person, with Kirax behind him. The warlords surrendered. Before the meeting began, they saw the scars on Kirax's body, the blade on Jackson's hip, and the bond between them. It was not strength through violence, it was power born of choice. Soon, smaller species began to request protection under Jackson's unity, not for weapons, not for war, but for wisdom. In their eyes, Jackson was not just a man anymore. He was something else, something they had no word for, and in hushed tones, they called him the Beast Speaker, a living bridge between fear and understanding. Back on Gracker, Kirax stood atop a stone ledge, watching the horizon around him. Younger beast creatures who once fought for dominance now waited quietly. They followed him, not because he was strongest, but because he had followed the human. Jackson stood beside him, arms folded, watching the sunrise. Ready? He asked softly. Kirax grunted, tail sweeping the earth like a flag. Jackson turned to his team. Let's move, he said. We've got another world to meet. A new planet had opened its gates. Another jungle, another apex predator, another death zone. But this time, Jackson wouldn't be sent to die. He would be welcomed. And if he wasn't, he would earn that welcome just like before. Through patience, through pain, through courage, not with cages, but with connection. Not with fire, but with faith. As the ship lifted into the sky, Kirax gave one last look at Gracker, his home, his kingdom, and let out a howl, not of anger, not of sorrow, but of promise. A promise that the bond they had made here would not stay hidden. It would spread, grow, and rewrite what the galaxy believed about life, about beasts, about humans, because one man was sent to die, but instead he returned with death as his friend, and together they had built a new empire, one not ruled by claws or crowns, but by trust.